Hello again, this is Dr. Joel Hunter teaching Introduction to Ethics, and today we're going to look at some of the problems for desire satisfaction theory. We are in the unit that covers value theory, and we are using Russ Schaefer Landau's book, Fundamentals of Ethics. And again, we're in Chapter 4. We have looked at, in Chapter 3, the attractions, what the desire satisfaction theory is, and what are some of its attractions. Today we're going to look at some of the problems that arise if we take desire satisfaction theory seriously. So we have two claims, and it's a very comprehensive theory because it says that something's good for us if and only if it fulfills our desires. And so we can break that down into the if and only if tells us that there is a sufficient condition and then there's a necessary condition. So let's look at that. So in point 1 here, if something's good for us, then it fulfills our desires. So that tells us that desire satisfaction theory is necessary for becoming better off, for promoting your good. Number 2 is if something fulfills our desires, then it is good for us. So you see how those two, in logic, these are called hypothetical claims, and so they have an antecedent and a consequent. So if the antecedent is true, the consequent is true. There's a logical connection assumed between the antecedent and the consequent. Antecedents on the follows the if, and then the consequent follows the then, at least in this expression of those claims. So the point being here is that you notice in the first one, the antecedent is something is good for us, and the consequent fulfills our desires. In claim number 2, it's reversed. If something fulfills our desires, then it is good for us. And that tells us that desire satisfaction theory is sufficient for becoming better off. All right, so let's unpack that just a bit. Or let's look at, not unpacking it, but let's look at some challenges to this. And we'll take on the very first one, which is the stronger claim, the desire satisfaction. Satisfying our desires is necessary for our well-being. Okay, and there are several counterexamples that are discussed in your text. These are on page 52 in the 3rd edition. And the first one would be pleasant surprises. So these would be things that made your life better, but that you hadn't expected. So in other words, it seems like there are cases where my life goes better, but it wasn't because of a pre-existing desire that I had satisfied. It was something else that came up. Maybe a long-lost relative died and left me, a lot of money or something like that. I had no idea. I didn't desire it, but there it is. So that's kind of an odd thing, is that it seems like our lives can go better, can improve, even if we don't have pre-existing desires that are satisfied as a result of that. Okay, second case would be a question of agency, or the second counterexample, agency, which is, well, what about the competency of the person having the desires, like small children and the severely disabled, for example? When it comes to being able to play and be healthy and healthy enough to play, a small child at least, is not going to have the ability to satisfy that desire if they don't know about things like, say, vaccinations that will prevent them from getting serious diseases. So they don't want to get shots, right? Because they have that desire to avoid shots at all costs because it hurts. But they don't know. They aren't informed enough to be able to understand the bigger satisfaction that they would achieve, which is this healthy, active life can be dependent on getting these vaccinations. Third case would be suicidal people, and it seems odd that if we were to prevent them, like we set up hotlines and we provide interventions to give suicidal people a chance to talk and and rethink what their desire is to take their own life, that, though, is frustrating whatever that particular wish is that the person is feeling. And that seems like they're better off as a result by having their desire frustrated. So we're going to come back to that. That comes up in a later objection. But those are some counterexamples to the claim that desire satisfaction is necessary for well-being, because it seems like there are some other things that don't involve satisfied desires that lead to well-being. So now it might be that the desire satisfaction theorists can come up with some qualifications to this, and make include some exceptions in their theory that would cover this, and so they would be able to perhaps respond to this. We're going to go now to the second, that desire satisfaction is sufficient for well-being, and we're going to look at, in particular, some of those adjustments that the desire satisfaction theorist might make and see what that leads to. Okay, so first counterexample would be a desire based on a false belief. And this is where it's important, not important, but you can look at, start thinking back to hedonism, our other value theory to look at. Remember, in hedonism says that pleasure, in particular enjoyment, the attitudinal pleasures, are intrinsically valuable. In other words, they're valuable in their own right and for their own sake. And so that is an objective theory of value. But desire satisfaction theory is not an objective theory of value. So desire satisfaction theory and hedonism do not play well together. And this is going to come up here in just a moment. So let's look at this question of false beliefs. Suppose that, I'm just going to take the second bullet point here. All right, so suppose that you want to be popular with a cool group of people like philosophers. And you think that they are like glamorous and happy. Then you get to know a philosopher or two, and the truth becomes a little bit clearer that there's nothing particularly glamorous. They're not particularly happy people in many cases. Maybe they're in fact rather shallow and maybe miserable people to be around. And you're reminded then of the old saying, beware of what you wish for, desire. You might just get it. And so, there is an example then of you had a false belief, or you had a desire that was shaped by or formed by a false belief. That philosophers were the cool people, and once you realized that it was actually a false belief, what does that do about your desire? I mean, you got your desire satisfied, right? So that should be sufficient for promoting your good, but it didn't, right? It made you part of an unhappy, unpleasant group of people. So then what happens is we can make our first adjustment. Informed desires. So if we look at then, I'm putting back up the second claim from the first slide, and this is the one that says that desire satisfaction is sufficient for our life to go well. If something fulfills our desires, then it's good for us. Okay, that's the sufficient claim. So now we revise it, given this example of desires that are based on false beliefs, that problem. So if something fulfills our informed desires, then it's good for us. Okay, so our desire satisfaction theorist has made a good move here, and they've included a qualification that the desires have to be informed, so they can't be based on false beliefs. Okay, very good. Now, what about some other kinds of desires here? Remember that not all of the things that we want are related to us. Sometimes we are thinking of others. We're wanting things that are in the interests of a stranger even. or a family member, or even not even another human being, but maybe other living things, maybe pets, maybe the planet, right? So you can have these desires to improve the lives of others, even strangers. It won't necessarily make you better off, though, okay? And even getting that, the satisfaction of desires for the well-being of others does not make you better off, may not make you better off. And so one of the replies to this is, oh, wait a minute, but I felt better as a result of having these other regarding desires satisfied. And that's when we go, oh, that's a foul. We throw the flag because you just snuck in hedonism. You just snuck in pleasure or happiness, and you don't allow intrinsic values into your theory. All right, so there's no room for, I'm sorry, it's not there's no room, it's that it is illicit then to change desire satisfaction theory to include an intrinsic value, because then you create all the other problems that you had solved for desire satisfaction theory not being about objective values. So the fact that you were pleased to get what you want is irrelevant for the desire satisfaction theorist. So you can't really sneak that in on the account of the desire satisfaction theorist. So they've got to qualify this, again, to take off the table disinterested and other regarding desires. So we had informed desires, right? We got that from last time. Now we're going to have to revise it even more and limit it more. We're going to say if something fulfills our informed self-regarding desires, then it's good for us. Okay. So forget about those other people. We have to modify our theory so that we're talking about what is good for us, what promotes our well-being, and it's going to be if something fulfills our informed self-regarding desires. Okay, next we have then the problem of disappointment. So if 2b is true, it guarantees that there will be some improvement in your life if you get what you want. Just coming back to 2b here, if something fulfills our informed self-regarding desires, then it's good for us. So if it's true, then that guarantees that there will be some improvement in your life if you get what you want. Okay, but now imagine getting everything you want. Okay, I'll give you a couple seconds. Now, is it plausible? Is it maybe even likely then you would feel some letdown even after getting everything you want? Or being even worse, completely miserable. You've gotten everything you want. It was your own personal desires that shaped it, and you got it all. Is it possible to feel let down? Well, there's a lot of testimonial evidence to the effect that that does in fact happen, and your author gives you some examples in the text, discusses a couple examples. He quotes from biography of John McEnroe, a famous tennis player, and talks about his success. He reached the top of the tennis world, and then he was reflecting about how that success did not translate into feelings of well-being. He felt it kind of hollow. So then in cases of disappointment, we have to say that desire satisfaction doesn't always make us better off. Okay, and there again, it's tempting to sneak in and, that I'm pleased as a result of getting my satisfied desires. Okay, no, again, can't sneak in an intrinsic value like pleasure, like enjoyment. Okay, now, what about ignorance of the desire satisfaction? And this seems kind of interesting or maybe odd. What if you get your informed, self-regarding desire satisfied? Okay, you get that. You get what you hope for, but you don't realize it. You never know that your goal has been met. And that seems like you are not better off then, because if you aren't aware of it. Right, so there's an example in your text Imagine a medical researcher whose deepest desire is finding a cure for, say, cancer. And, excuse me, after years of really hard work, she succeeds. Excuse me again. But she goes to her grave never realizing she succeeded. She thinks, when she dies, that all of her efforts, all of her research had been for naught, that it was waste. And that seems then that her success does not mark any improvement in her life. Okay, so there's the possibility of having your desire satisfied, but you still not experiencing that welfare, that sense of well-being, because you're ignorant that you reached your goal, that your desire was satisfied. Okay, another interesting case here, and I think, for me at least, this is probably one of the more powerful objections to desire satisfaction theory, and that's this notion of impoverished desires. And we have to remember that desires are, this is a psychological state, it's a mental state, and that these are to some extent shaped by our environment, by our upbringing, and, as well as, of course, whatever our own agency contributes to them. So the role of one's environment, the role of one's upbringing, and here we can, think of culture as being part of this, is going to have an effect on what it is that we actually desire. And so we can look in history for examples of people who, let's say, were oppressed in some way or another, and because they were prevented from having certain desires satisfied, like, say, a good education, or like having access to the same kinds of civil rights as others had, of being able to participate in their own government. Suppose all of that had been denied them, and so as a result of that, they never had the desire. They were always assuming that that was something that they could not desire because they couldn't get it. And so their desires then were impoverished. They never sought those things. And then, so what's the impoverished part of it? Well, the impoverished part of it is that desire satisfaction theory would have to say, well, okay, so even an oppressed person or persons, a slave, they have to be satisfied with what they desire themselves. And if their environment, if their upbringing has suppressed, the possibilities of that desire, then we have to say, well, as long as they get what they want, then that promotes their well-being. And that seems really odd. And one of the responses to this is that, it seems like you would want to value something like freedom, for example. The problem for the desire satisfaction theorist, though, is, well, you're saying that freedom is then intrinsically valuable, and nothing, though, is valuable in its own right. So intellectual achievement, artistic achievement, whatever that is, freedom, pleasure, none of that is valuable unless you desire it. And so what if your upbringing and environment have conspired to prevent you from desiring some of those lofty things? And of course, lofty then is, implies that there is some sort of rank, to a rank of value to things that are worth pursuing. So desire satisfaction theorist just has to say, well, so much the worse than for people who are oppressed or people who have impoverished desires. All that matters is they get it satisfied. But then it seems like that really doesn't necessarily lead to a good life. Okay. Then lastly, we're going to look, not lastly, but second to last, the paradox of self-harm and self-sacrifice. We brought this up in earlier thing about, the counterexample, the suicidal person, where it seems that we are making their life go better by preventing or frustrating their desires to take their own life. We can look at it in another respect. Look at the person who desires to sacrifice their life, maybe for another, maybe for a cause, maybe, and not like sort of some sort of martyr complex or something like that. But let's speak about then a rational individual. Then, okay, here, how about this? I always like the Harry Potter example. So Lily Potter chose, when Voldemort attacked her family, to sacrifice her life to protect her infant son, Harry. Right? Remember the story? And she desired to protect, this is the other regarding desire, right? So that kind of disqualifies that. But the fact is that it was her self-sacrifice. She desired to give her life for her family. And she got that desire satisfied. And she did lay down her life, and she did it willingly. So it seems really odd, though, for the desire satisfaction theorist to come and say it. And so, so her life went better as a result of that. Oh, that promoted her welfare. Well, no, it didn't. Her life ended. There was no one there to enjoy the benefits of having that satisfied desire. I mean, she herself, the self-regarding part of this, she is no longer there to enjoy that. So there's a paradox, okay, that on the one hand, you satisfy a desire that ends up harming you, maybe even ending your life, so then there's no one there to have the desire satisfied. To have the life go better as a result of having the desire satisfied. So there's a paradox. That suggests that there's something suspect about desire satisfaction theory. Okay, so lastly, I promise this time, the fallibility of our deepest desires. And this is related somewhat to the impoverished desires too. All right, let's reset our claim, our modified claim from desire satisfaction theory. If something fulfills our informed, self-regarding desires, then it's good for us. Now, if that's true, then remember, we have to say that no desires are intrinsically better than any others. So then we have these examples of individuals who have these conflicting, what am I trying to say? We have that have desires that are obvious to others, to an observer, that they are harming rather than making their life go better. They're making it worse. For example, the wealthy shoplifter. So let's say, I have all the money in the world, but I just have this thing about spatulas. And so every time I go in Target, every time I go to Walmart, every time I go in whatever kitchen store, I am taking a spatula, at least one. I just can't get enough spatulas. It's my own informed, self-regarding desire, and so I fulfill it and by taking it, even though I could have paid for it. I'm wealthy enough to do that. Okay, so that seems to introduce then this problem of I can't criticize, you can't criticize me, the wealthy shoplifter, because I'm getting my desire satisfied. And so you have to say, as a desire satisfaction theorist, that that's good for me. But then that seems to be dumb, right? That seems to be wrong, because it is, it seems that enjoying stealing is not going to lead to a better life. I'm going to be anxious maybe about being caught. Maybe I would be embarrassed about, this being made known. Maybe I really don't enjoy all the planning that has to go into it. Maybe I don't, I don't have a good plan for what I'm doing with all these spatulas. Where do I put them? So you get the idea that it doesn't seem that my bizarre conduct is something that is going to be a strength for promoting my well-being rather than a weakness for it. And so the problem then is desire satisfaction theorists can't criticize me because I'm getting exactly what I want. And if you did, then you're sneaking in some sort of objective theory of value. Right? So even if my desire is super, super unusual, the good life is going to mean that getting that unusual desire satisfied. So once you start introducing this idea that, well, some desires are actually better than others, then you are starting to rank them in value, and that requires some objective theory of value to do that. Okay, so there is, in a nutshell, our our problems then for desire satisfaction theory, and we can sum up the concluding part of this chapter then by asking really the leading question, and this, if you recall our hedonism discussion, chapter 2, problems with hedonism, we asked the same kind of question. Is desire satisfaction alone the key to our well-being? It seems like, hey, there might be other intrinsic goods, things like autonomy, or freedom, or happiness, or virtue, or knowledge. It doesn't seem that desire satisfaction guarantees a good life. We looked at that. We looked at several objections to that. It doesn't seem that desire satisfaction is necessary for a good life. We had the pleasant surprises and the issue of agency as well. And so it seems that some things might be valuable even if we fail to value them. Maybe the good life depends on objective values. And so that's where we end this discussion then of desire satisfaction theory. And I encourage you to look at the discussion questions. I didn't mention this in previous videos where we were discussing chapters 1 through 3, but I do want to point out that it's really worth your time looking at these discussion questions because they will reinforce the concepts, and it will be a way for you to sort of check your own grasp of the arguments that are presented, as well as your ability to express them in your own words. Really encourage you to do that. I have found that to be a very valuable exercise. You don't obviously have to write them out. I'm not requiring that for homework or anything like that, but they are very good questions to reinforce what you have read on your own, as well as hopefully listened to in this video. All right, gang. Well, thank you for tuning in. I appreciate it, and I hope you enjoyed the reading. And we will be moving into normative ethics in subsequent chapters. This is our third unit in the Introduction to Ethics, and third and final unit. And so I look forward to seeing you next time. Take care.